This is another story about a road trip I took with my father. It was March break 1983, and Dad thought he'd take me to Las Vegas with him, and then spend a week in California. We flew to Los Angeles, picked up a rental, and then drove to Las Vegas, arriving at night. For the next week, my father, who worked for the Photo Corporation of America's Canadian operation, attended the photo industry convention at the Las Vegas Convention Center, which was next door to our hotel, the Las Vegas Hilton. This wasn't the Vegas of today by any stretch, and was probably closer to what Hunter S. Thompson encountered. I'm pretty sure my mother, who was a psych nurse at the time, wanted to section my father after that. But I survived this trip. I have to admit I was pretty bored, but a $10 a day allowance and quarters kept me busy at the Circus Casino, which had an entire level of arcade games. As a bonus to my inner Av geek, the top floors of the Hilton were being renovated, and I found a way up there. From the hallway windows, I had a good view of Nellis Air Force Base and could watch the fighters taking off and landing all day. Towards the end of the week, Dad came back to the hotel, and somehow I was actually there. He said he'd made some calls and was taking me to see something. Here I am, looking thrilled about the whole thing. I had no idea where we were going. I figured it was just another one of his railway adventures, or perhaps he got a lead on a lens or a camera he wanted. He had mentioned that the Thunderbirds were going to unveil their new aircraft tomorrow. I looked confused and asked if they were doing that tomorrow, and where were we going? He just smiled and said, "We're going to go see them today." 1982 was not a good year for the team, as in January, 4 members, including their leader, died in the tragic Diamond crash. An investigation was launched and the 1982 season was cancelled. Technically, the first F-16 and Thunderbird markings joined the team in June 1982. The day after our visit, the new fleet of F-16s would be unveiled to dignitaries. Here are the 1983 Thunderbird F-16As, the day before they were officially unveiled. I had not seen the Thunderbirds perform at this point, but I had seen the Blue Angels in their A4s, which was a wilder show than the Canadian Armed Forces Snowbirds performed with their Canadair Tudor jets. To me, these F-16s might as well have been X-Wing fighters to my 14-year-old eyes. All the aircraft that you see here were replaced around 1992 with F-16C models. The aircraft that you see here were then repainted and transferred to the Republic of Singapore Air Force for training. By 1996, all were back in the United States. Thunderbird 1 is now at the U.S. Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio. Numbers 2 and 4 were sent to the Boneyard at Davis-Monthan in 1996. Number 3 was transferred to the 364th TRS at Shepherd Air Force Base as a GF-16A ground maintenance trainer. It is now at the Robbins Air Force Base at the Century of Flight hangar in Thunderbird's markings. Number 5 was sent to the Boneyard, then back to the Republic of Singapore Air Force as a GF-16A ground maintenance trainer. Which leaves us with number 6, which was a little worse for wear after being one of the soloist's aircraft. It suffered a crack longeron, which was the first ever reported to General Dynamics. It was repaired and later loaned to the Republic of Singapore Air Force. Returned to the United States Air Force, it was found to have suffered further cracks. It was then withdrawn from service, and at present is a gate guardian at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona, and is painted in the standard F-16 scheme. After dragging me to a Vegas show and seeing my first 24 odd topless showgirls at the Suzanne Summers Review, Dad took me to Mojave, California as soon as my eyes unfogged. But before we got to the Mojave airport, Dad decided to drive right into the main gate of Edwards Air Force Base and asked if there was anything his son, who was in the Royal Canadian Air Cadets, could see. The guard just laughed and in an accent that sounded surprisingly like Richard Pryor said, "No sir, you can't come in here. We've got too many top secret projects and aliens and stuff. Y'all can't be seeing that, but go over to the Mojave airport." So we did. Here we see the civil ramp at Mojave. I can still recall how cold it was out in the desert, and for a kid from Canada used to somewhat harsh winters, I was quite surprised by that. We'll start with the B-17. It's a G model built by Lockheed Vega at Burbank, and it was taken on strength by the United States Army Air Force on the first anniversary of D-Day, June 6, 1945, at Dallas, Texas. It served initially in Puerto Rico in a search and rescue role, and then it was converted to a training role. In 1948, it served as a VIP transport in Brazil and returned to the United States Air Force in 1954. In 1956, it was sent to Davis-Monthan for storage and sold to a smeltering company in 1959, which may have been the end of it. But it was sold to a company in California that converted it to a water bomber, and as you can see, it continued in that role for some time. Today it's in the hands of Robert Pond and is apparently located in Las Vegas. To the left is a Cessna Skymaster, and the background is something that looks like a Burt Rutan creation, but I have no memory of what it was, nor could I find any details. And to the right of that is a Glosser Meteor Target Tug Mark 20. It served with the Royal Air Force in 264 Squadron, and was later transferred to the Royal Navy, serving in 728 Squadron of the Fleet Air Arm based in Malta. In 1975, it was struck from service and wound up in Mojave, California. I can't find out what it was doing there, but I do know in 1987 it was taken on by the United States Air Force's Museum Loan Program and then transferred to the Air Force Flight Test Center Museum at Edwards Air Force Base, where it has been since. To its right is a B-25 Mitchell, which I couldn't find any information on. This is Flight Systems, and if you subscribe to Air Classics or Air Progress back in the day, you're probably well aware of them. I sure was. But what I didn't know was that Flight Systems was founded by a Canadian from Toronto by the name of Robert Laidlaw. He flew with the RCAF during World War II in Spitfires and later Photo Recon Mosquitoes. After the war, he graduated from the University of Toronto and became a test pilot for de Havilland Canada. He wasn't satisfied with that level of flying, so he joined the US Navy, where he continued as a test pilot and went to MIT. He then went to work for North American Rockwell, eventually becoming its vice president of research and engineering. Bob was awarded Aviation Week magazine's Lifetime Achievement Award in 2005. Sadly, he passed away in 2010. Unfortunately, I have no information about the F-100, which served as the company's gate guardian. Bob formed Flight Systems in 1968 here in Mojave. Flight Systems had its own fleet of Sabres, T-33s, A-4 Skyhawks, and Super Sabres for a variety of testing and support roles. They were painted gloss white with blue stripes that carried the Flight Systems logo and could be found at US bases around the world. Eventually, Flight Systems would win a contract to provide Sabre drones to the United States Army for testing its two surface-to-air missiles, namely the Stinger and Patriot. Flight Systems was able to procure over 50 Canadair Sabres for the contract from Dave McEwen in New Brunswick, Canada. Here we see two Sabres, one with a completely visible civilian registration, N5591N. The Sabre Mark V was built by Canadair and first flew on the 14th of March 1954. It was assigned to the 1st Air Division of the Royal Canadian Air Force and flew with 416 and 430 squadrons, and later with the Royal Canadian Air Force's Golden Hawks demonstration team. Here's the very aircraft on display at the 1957 Canadian National Exhibition in Toronto, Ontario. It was disposed of in September 1970 by Crown Assets, the government's disposal corporation, and made its way down to Mojave in 1980. Everything I found cites it was shot down in a weapons trial by an ADAT system, seen here, on the 26th of June 1982. But here we are in March of 1983, and it's still alive on the ramp. Pretty strange. And before we left, we found the Flight Systems storage yard. It was full of Mark V Sabres, and some even had Canadian Centennial markings applied to them from 1967. The one at center left, RCAF 23344, first flew from the Canadair plant on the 5th of October 1954. It flew with 441, 439, and 400 squadrons RCAF. It was sold by Crown Assets in 1970 to Maritime Aircraft Overhaul and Repair in Moncton, New Brunswick, who later passed it on to Flight Systems. RCAF 23351 on the right first flew a few weeks after 344. It only flew with 439 Squadron and was later acquired by Flight Systems. It was sold to the same company in California, and it too ended up in the possession of the United States Air Force Museum, but its location today is unknown. After leaving Mojave, Dad and I drove to Bakersfield, California because he wanted to see trains. And then we drove to Yosemite, where Dad pretended to be Ansel Adams for a day. We got to San Francisco and then drove down the Pacific Coast Highway to LA. There, we stayed with his cousin Gary, whose family has quite an interesting aviation history. All that and more in part 2, where Dad and I visit Chino, California's airport, home to Ed Maloney's Planes of Fame Museum, and then the David Talichet Aircraft Graveyard. And with that, this video comes to an end. Thanks for watching, and if you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so. Give the video a like if I've earned it, and ring that bell so you'll never miss another episode. I'll be giving a major channel update next week, you don't want to miss it. So, stay where you're at, another video is coming to where you're too.